talked about, to some degree, and I must tell you that there was in the first panel, there were a lot of pieces of information which perhaps you can bring out here, but let me introduce you first. Laura Rambosch is a project director for Action. She's a therapist and deals with children who do finally come to her. And again, we're dealing with a situation where you don't see the average child, you're seeing people who need therapy. So you've really had extensive experience. And Raven Cuellar is a child psychologist, also both boots on the ground people who are there every day worrying about these children. So I think what I'd like to focus on this particular panel, and of course David you met earlier, is the whole idea of now that we've recognized that the child is behavior has changed, they may be cranky, they may be angry, they may be withdrawn, they have a whole lot of different issues. I'd like you to just address how we'll deal with this. And I think that maybe the easiest way to do it is to begin at the early ages that you deal with. Why don't you talk about let's say a 4-year-old who is having problems and that they're wetting the bed again, they're angry, they're lashing out. What do you advise? What do you do? What don't you do?
Well, thank you, Dr. Ramo, for that very nice introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. So one of the things with very young kids, and actually for all kids, it's very important to maintain normal routines, to maintain mealtime, dinner time, bedtime, school time. It's almost a normative response for a parent to perhaps want to allow the child to stay up a little later or have something different for dinner that's not normally arranged for the mealtime. But kids really thrive on normal routines. And so maintaining those normal routines are very important. Also, just to allow kids to express fears and fantasies through play. I think that Dr. Del Fabro talked earlier about how children oftentimes will reenact through play. I had an experience many years ago after 9/11 where a child who was 4 years old saw the television and saw the planes that were shown on TV going into the towers.
Over and over again.
Over and over again. And so that child began to reenact with toy airplanes and Lego buildings crashing into the towers. And so the conversation with the parents was limiting the media exposure for that child because it was upsetting to him and he was reenacting that. Raven, did you want to share?
Sure. I'll just add that one of the most common questions we get from parents of young children who have been through a traumatic event is, should I still discipline my child at all? I feel so terrible and guilty for what they had to go through. So an aspect of maintaining those normal routines that we stress as being so important is that yes, you still do want to set reasonable expectations and consequences, and that actually is what children of all age, whether they can tell you or realize it or not, do crave, and that is their sense of a return to normalcy.
And I would just add too that that frequently parents, when their child experiences traumatic or
You want to
things,
hold it a little farther away.
how about that?
There you go.
There we go. When their children experience traumatic or hard events, if they themselves have had traumatic events in their past, a lot of times that will rekindle a lot of strong feelings. And so frequently the parents or caregivers, they really have to take care of themselves. And kids are very attuned to modeling, as we shared earlier, parents' behavior. So, really emphasizing the parents, continuing their routine, getting their support, not using alcohol or other substances, to numb their feelings. Those sorts of things can really be important to how well a child does.
Okay, so I understand you want to keep everything the same, but you have to talk to these children, and we had the discussion that how do you talk to a 3 or 4-year-old in a way that is reassuring and also what shouldn't you do? What's the bad stuff? What's the mistakes we all make?
Well, I think there's a number of things, and we actually have some slides later on. We can talk a bit about it. But I think that reassuring children is one of the things that I think is most reassuring to children is is maintaining a sense of normalcy so that children understand that, I describe it to parents as kids sort of need this bubble to bounce around in, that they know where the boundaries are and where the limits are, where the behaviors are acceptable and where they aren't. And I think that reassuring children in terms of what Dr. Graber was speaking about is that parents can let children know. One of the things that we talk about with parents is noticing children. I see you crying, you seem to be sad. I see you hitting your brother, you look like you might be angry. And so sort of identifying and giving language to young kids because they don't have language when they're
So
that small.
you don't deal head on with the issue like this kid who watched 9/11 and you don't say, sit down and talk to him about it, or you just kind of say, well, you know, I'm going to keep, do you?
Well, I think like others on the panel have suggested, you can create that opening in very simple terms for a young child and just say, you know, if there's anything that you're feeling really scared or confused about, I'm here to talk. And it's okay to have confused feelings or anything you're feeling, it's okay. And that may be a sign to come to mom or dad and ask for what could help make you feel better.
David, you've had a lot of experience with this. Is it, in your experience, how do you get parents the children to open up when you have a small child? What is the technique you would use with the child? Obviously, everybody's different, but there's a certain approach. Or
well,
not.
I think with younger kids, certainly, as I've been alluded to, I mean, play and fantasy is sort of the world they live in. So, you know, in that regard, this child's playing over and over what's on their mind, and so you can't really shut that off. I think shutting off the TV where they're seeing it over and over again. But I mean, you know, actually making the time to play with your child, and you know, most parents have very good instincts, and they can help sort of guide the play. It is hard for a young child to directly talk about, well, I'm worried about planes flying into the building. Some do, but sort of creating the space to play and creating contact time, where you know parents are very, very busy, and to have time to actually be present with your child, even for a few minutes, is really important and not easy to necessarily do.
So you think parents are even sensitive to this issue? I mean, I'm struck by the 4-year-old, because I see these kids, you know, multitasking and doing everything else. You think in somewhere in their brain they're watching that TV. What would you advise about, just as an aside, what would you tell parents about letting them watch TV? Because that's where really all, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. It's just the way television is. And so what do you tell parents about watching television? I mean, there's so much violence out there.
Well, you know, it's interesting you asked that because there may actually be a handout about media that's on the table that was published by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network that I'd like to talk about later on. And it really talks about how to limit some of the media and the violence that's on the media with certain children. So I know I recently saw another child, and there was some media coverage about a person on the news that was related to this person and had committed a violent crime. And it was very upsetting for this child. And so the conversation was with the parents about, could you watch the television at night when the kids aren't in the room? Watch the 10 o'clock news instead of the 6 o'clock news. And just talking about how the media exposure, if it's very violent and pertains to that child, can be upsetting to children. So a lot of times it's just educating parents because parents don't really know that. And how would they know that if they haven't been taught that or had that experience?
Well, let's talk about school-age children who are clearly different than the little guys. What are your comments about those people?
Well, I think again with school-age children, we want to encourage children to talk about their worries or their fears. Again, I think that Dr. Craikman and Dr. Isaacson spoke about not necessarily forcing children to talk about the specific event, but when children are fearful about going to school, perhaps they're more clingy to their parents, they hold on to their legs or arms, they hide behind them. To just encourage kids, it's okay to talk about what your worries or fears may be about. and just make a space for kids to talk, I think is a welcoming way that parents can really encourage children to just know that there's a place that they can talk about things in an open
Now,
way.
school-age children, we're really not talking about adolescents. Are there signals there where you've got trouble, where you've got potential suicide, where you've got really serious problems? I think one of the things that people would like to know is when to call for help.
Oh, it's a great question. So I don't want to.
David has always got
So I'm always a microphone hog. So well, first of all, interesting enough, actual completed suicides in younger children under 10 is actually quite rare. It does not mean they don't think about it and that some don't attempt it, but it's actually a very rare occurrence. But nonetheless, I think some of the signs that people talked about is there a drop-off in their behavior? So are they more withdrawn? Are they not wanting to spend time with friends? Are they not doing homework? Are they more angry or just emotionally upset? And not just for an hour here or an hour there. We're looking at sort of patterns over time.
Oh.
Those can be worrisome. If kids talk about death or dying, those are strong cues that that there's something going on.
And so what are the resources? You two are valuable, all three of you are valuable resources, but there are just two of you. Are there very many, if you have a child, what are people out here thinking, well, gee, maybe my child needs some help? What can they get? How do they get to people like you?
That's a great question. I think in terms of resources in the community, the schools are a really great place to start because the schools can also refer to community providers. I'm looking at the school people thinking that that's correct. And so use the schools as a resource, certainly, because they really oftentimes are the first point of contact with children because they're in the schools 5 days a week for several hours a day. Also, UNM is a great resource, and we have a program here called Action that specifically treats children who've experienced childhood trauma. The UNM Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry is a wonderful resource for families to reach out to, and the programs for children and adolescent. There are also many other providers in the community that are serving children who've experienced trauma, and one of the things we're working on is establishing a network of providers.
So if parents looking, would you say the best resource would maybe to start with UNM? And I know you have an emergency or sort of urgent care area. In fact,
Yeah, we have an emergency service that runs 24/7. I think the other thing is primary care providers are often excellent. Pediatrician, family practice, nurse practitioners are really good about, where are sort of worrisome versus, more normalized. And then I think the community actually has a fair number of good therapists. Child psychiatry in the state and across is a relative shortage. We have a lot here, and we can get people in, but a lot of times a good counselor or therapist is a good place to start.
And when I asked you the question, you gave me the symptoms that there's trouble. So you've got all these nonverbal cues. What do? How do you handle it as a parent? Your child is doing all the things you said. They're withdrawn, they're not doing their schoolwork. What is the strategy for that? What plan should a parent have? The schools have a plan for a crisis. How does a parent deal with it?
Sure. Well, one way is to just communicate as a parent to the child. I'm kind of concerned about you. And some kids who are experiencing fears or anxieties like to have somebody to talk with, somebody who you can say anything to, and they'll try to understand and be able to help out. So would you be willing to see a counselor with me, and I'll do this with you. And so a trauma or mental health assessment would probably be the next step. That would be at a clinic like ours or other trauma-focused clinics. And for parents, something to keep in mind is if you are seeing some signs of traumatic stress in your child, then you may look for a clinic or a program that specifically offers trauma-focused services, that teaches a child skills for how to cope with difficult feelings, regulate their emotions and behaviors better, and offers them a context to be able to really process some of the upsetting, difficult, or traumatic experiences that they've been through.
What I've heard is, other than not getting anxious yourself and providing a safe environment, when they come to you, they've really gotten to extreme. Can a parent do anything other than provide safety and And you know, is there anything more they can do than that?
Well, we think that the parents are the most important person in a child's life of all, and the youth looks to the parent for how to react and respond. And so the parent can really help to normalize a child's response.
I'm not doing a good job of asking the question, but basically I'm telling you, I know this. I'm a parent. I know my kid's not doing it. I either can't afford to go to a psychiatrist or I can't get in or whatever. So what, besides being I'm going to, you know, make sure you're safe, and when you go to bed the doors will be locked, but what else can you do? I mean, you see
Okay,
this
I
all
think
the
I'm following
time.
you now. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to try to start to speak to this question and let others respond as well. What we know as therapists are that kids can really benefit from simple coping strategies, and some of these are so easy and relatable that parents can absolutely be empowered to use some of the strategies that we have listed up here. So as therapists, we kind of think of different activities that will help to distract a kiddo who is feeling so stressed and worried and scared. And the more interactive those activities can be and really kind of help to increase and encourage family relationships, the better. So you see how simple some of these strategies are. Play a family game. Ask the child what they'd like to do for special time together. The more you can get a child kind of outdoors and kind of in touch with feeling safe and okay in their bodies and letting kind of nature help to soothe. So connecting with nature, family, and friends, those simple, practical ways of distracting a child can very much go a long way and can get them kind of over the hump. And maybe that would be enough, actually, in the wake of a traumatic event to help.
Well, that's very helpful. I think it gives parents some hope that they have an opportunity. Not all these are extreme situations, but I think every parent has seen their kid do some of the things you were talking about. You know, they're withdrawn and they don't seem as interested or whatever. And sort of, it's really a question of how do you enhance your family environment so that they can get through this time, which doesn't require a psychiatrist or, you know, a special counselor.
The other thing that I would add, Dr. Ramo, is these other activities that we would call mindfulness activities. It's a way of helping to ground and connect all of us, including children, in our bodies and feel a little more safe and okay and normal. And so examples of mindfulness activities are to take a walk outside, to prepare a healthy snack, but just to encourage the youth to really think about and maybe talk about how they're feeling right then and normalize any of those feelings. If there are signs of anxiety or stress, you can just kind of help your child to slow it all down, breathe deeply, and look around and take notice of what feels more okay and what more normal around them.
David, what do you tell parents?
Well, I think it's very, very similar. So, I mean, one of the things I think, therapy is very helpful, but what I tell parents is, look, I might spend 30 or 40 minutes with your child once a week, once every 2 weeks. Although I think that's valuable time, right? There are things you're with them all the time. So, you know them best. Every family has strengths, and and sometimes in a crisis you have to sort of search with families to re-identify those. And many children and families will know things that have helped them in the past. And sometimes in a crisis they forget those. And so sometimes it's good to call on things that they already know how to do. So, they're basic things. So, but they're really, really powerful.
Well, that's a very good point, yes.
I just want to also thank you, Dr. Ramo. I wanted to echo what was said earlier, that many, many children experience traumatic events, and with the support of their family and community, adjust to what's happened, have the opportunity when it's given the space to talk about it or experience, and they don't require professional services. They don't require therapy or psychiatry. It comes to mind, I recently talked with a family whose son had experienced a very traumatic event, and They were in a family where the parents were really able to support the kids, and I was able to talk with them about how they could support the kids, and they could always call back if the symptoms consistently extended for long periods of time, as was mentioned earlier. Because I think that sometimes parents just need to be reassured that they're doing the right thing and that their kids can, through their own family and community coping skills, work through these traumatic events. And I think that faith-based communities and spiritual support is also very important and has been very healing for families to seek out that support through their community.
Well, let's talk about, just for a few minutes before we take questions, about the hardest group, which are adolescents, I think. And you have some thoughts about that.
Well, I think that adolescence, in some ways, can be difficult. I think that, again, it's
In some ways.
I have one at home, so I love him to death, and I know that there are times when it's challenging. But again, reestablishing a sense of security and safety for the youth, talking with kids around the event and their feelings around the event. Also talking about what is it that you're doing and what the schools are doing or what the community is doing to reassure that kids are safe in that environment and in their home. Helping kids understand that strong feelings are often in response to traumatic events, and that's normal, that happens to kids sometimes when they experience a traumatic event.
One thing that we've learned with adolescents that can be so common, most of all of this developmental stage, are fantasies of revenge and retribution. So, for example, a 15-year-old who grew up in a context of community violence, witnessed many shootings, and actually was affected by one with the death of a family member, may be likely to develop those revenge fantasies and actually even develop targets for those fantasies. And so what parents and others can help do is try to kind of help take some of the power out of those revenge fantasies, which is actually just by talking it out and being somewhat honest as a parent that you're so angry too, and this was not fair and not okay, and figuring out what you can do that's not resorting to violence to kind of help restore somewhat of a sense of justice and fairness.
Well, let's see if we have some questions.
So we have a couple questions from the audience. After the shootings of Sandy Hook, my 7-year-old child did not want to go to school without me. Any suggestions?
I can definitely take that one. After the Roswell shooting, I was telling Dr. Ramo I had a couple patients that had previous challenges with school refusal who did not want to go to school. And so really, the key with that, and both these actually lived outside of Albuquerque, so this was done via phone, was really to talk to the child, but going back to really saying, look, they really must go to school. And so the most important thing is to have that child get back in school, and that's sometimes easier said than done. But the clear expectation is they go to school. The schools can be really helpful. Sometimes, teachers are fabulous. I've had teachers that will come out, and at times their counselor will meet the kid at the car. And if you can do that for a couple of days, a lot of times the child will go back to school. But really expecting that, and then also reminding the parent and the child about, again, what had worked in the past. So the most important thing is to try to make sure those child goes back to school.
And then the second question is, should I let my 10-year-old son watch violent stuff on the TV news?
Only if it's Channel 7.
Well, I'm a microphone hog, so I'll tell you. So I think that some of the recommendations from people that have expertise in this field, I'm not one, is really that probably they'll watch it. A lot of kids will watch it anyway, but sometimes watching it with your child, or at least discussing, even a 10-year-old, at least if we're going to watch it, what do you think? And also parents sharing your own feelings. When I watch that, I feel really disturbed. I mean, it makes me feel anxious and upset. What about you? Again, but I think watching it over and over again is not a great idea for a lot of people, frankly.
Well, you see, obviously you're seeing the sort of product of this violent society, the Mortal Kombat games. They're just everywhere in the movies and everything else. And I wonder how much do you think this is impacting? Do you think you're busier now than you ever were with all this violence, or not? You think it's mattered?
Well, I think, personally, and I'm not as up on the literature, I have read recently some concerns by some experts in the field that the watching and playing of violent video games can increase aggression in children and in youth. I do think that as a therapist, if I were working with a child who had a tendency to be very violent and aggressive, I might have a conversation with the parents and the child about concern about how that might affect their aggression.
And we have one final question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have concern about trauma that is untreated in children. And I was a participant at the citywide outreach event on October 26th, which attracted many, many children, mostly children who were homeless of all ages, and also children of volunteers there. And that's when the shooting occurred right next to us. And I'm not aware of any treatment that was offered afterwards, but I just 2 weeks ago talked to a mother who said that her 4-year-old had to be pulled out of preschool because she was still traumatized. And so I guess what my question would be, what kind of resources can we offer the parents of the children who were at this event? And it's many months later, but the trauma effect is continuing.
Do you want to talk about it? So one of the resources that we are fortunate enough through the Action Program to be a partner with is this website and this organization called the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. This is a wonderful resource. This website is available, and anybody can go onto this website and look on those links for handouts and information on almost any kind of traumatic event that I can think of. Hurricanes, earthquakes, they're very quick to post things when there's a traumatic event. And there's handouts on here for parents, there's handouts on here for caregivers, and also for providers. In terms of local resources, I think is what you're also asking about, and I'm not thinking of anything right now.
Well, I will tell you that. So I don't really know the specifics for that event, but on the department website there is a link under this topic tonight, and we're going to load all of the pamphlets that were out front and the resources that many people, including APS, has given us, and we're going to put those all on. They'll probably be up there in the next couple days if they're not already up there. And there's a lot of resources on these.
We'll take one more question.
It seemed like at least 2 references have been made to what are the follow-up resources, and they may be kind of short in some cases. You mentioned about the coping things, going for a walk. Some of that sounds like grandparents function, but we don't all have grandparents. And I know at least my church has an affiliation with a middle school nearby, and we do some after-school things and so forth. And it would seem like you could develop almost a registry of schools that don't have an adoptive church or faith-based community. Maybe somebody could adopt one, and then you could kind of mobilize them when you understand you have an increased need or incident, so that, because the parents probably are in as bad a shape as the children are, that's what you're talking about, how we're supposed to behave well. But then maybe this sort of party with a little distance on this could be a nurturing thing. We could be trained to do that better and know what is helpful and what isn't helpful, so it's just a possibility. I'm part of NAMI, New Mexico, but we would, and we don't do a lot with kids, but we certainly should, and we certainly know a lot of their parents well, and as do you, so.
Well, thank you, and I think partnering with community is really important in supporting kids, and partnering with schools, as you mentioned, and with grandparents and groups, I think is a great idea, so thank you.
Well, I think we'll end on that note. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists. This has really been a wonderful discussion. It's nice to know that we have people like you that can be so helpful and go into the schools. And I know we didn't talk at all in any depth in terms of what you really have to offer, but it's just wonderful knowing that. And thank you all for very much, and for all the panelists. And I'd like Dr. Torn to come up, and here he is.
I want to thank everybody for being here with us tonight. I want to thank, of course, the Albuquerque Public Schools, the New Mexico State Department of Health, and the City of Albuquerque Cultural Services. As Dr. Graver mentioned, this is going to be made available on the web. Unfortunately, bad things will continue to happen. We can't stop them. First of all, we want to help our community. So if violence, as mentioned, probably will continue. If it happens again, there's going to be a source. So if you access the Department of Psychiatry website, there's going to be a link. And as Dr. Graver mentioned, the information that was discussed today will be provided there. In addition to that, this panel discussion will be also transmitted in two additional TV stations, GOV-TV and UPublic. We want to thank Dr. Barry Romo, KOT7 channel, and most of all, you. Our goal in helping the community in issues related to mental health and trauma, we can't do it alone. We need to partner with the community. Thank you very much.